Good evening once again, church. It is glad to be here among you, and I hope that you are doing very well. And happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. It's a wonderful thing to celebrate Father's Day. And along with that, we are going to look at what we have entrusted to God. You know, a lot of us growing up with our fathers, we expected certain things from them, didn't we? We entrusted them with certain things that we needed to be secure in. We needed to know that they were there for us. And it's the same way with God, is it not? It's the same way that we need to know that there are certain things that we can trust God with. And I think that we have an example of how we can put our trust into God, or what we should put in trust with God. Our text, no doubt, comes from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 12. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit of what we put in trust of others. You know, in this physical world, there are certain things that we want to protect. For instance, how many of us have bank accounts? Well, if you're honest, you could say you probably have a bank account. You know, not too many people out there anymore, although there is some, but not too many people out there just stuff their money into a mattress and it is good with that. No, we want it in a bank. That way, in case something happens to our house, a tornado blows it down, or a hurricane, or an earthquake damages it, or a fire, or God forbid we get broken into and they find our money. I had my grandma on my dad's side. As little as money as they had coming in, she would manage to take some of that money and put it to the side. And she hid it. And I thought it was a very clever place of where she would hide it at, but she would hide it. She would take whatever money she was able to set aside. It might not have been that much at the time, but she would take a little bit of money, and she had one of them little Secrets tins. They used to come in a tin. And, you know, a tin about so long, about so thick. Open it up, it was square, and she would put money into that. It would fold up, and she would put money into that tin. And then she would wrap tin foil around that. And then she would stick that tin foil wrapped Secret tin with her money in the ice box, in the freezer part of the ice box. And no one knew it was there until one day my uncle was up there. I believe it was my uncle. And he was talking to her, and I think he had to look for something, or she wanted him to look at something in the refrigerator or the freezer part of it. And he was going through there, and he came across this tinfoil, wrapped up tinfoil, and he's like, you know, Mom, what is this? And she said, what is what? What's this tinfoil? There's no label on it. I'm going to throw it away. There's no label on it. She says, don't you throw that away. That's my money. That's money I set aside. And he said, well, Mom, you need to put that into the bank. That way it will work for you. It will draw you interest. She goes, well, what if I need it? He goes, well, you could write a check on it or go up there and take some out. She goes, well, he goes, well, what if you got robbed? She goes, I wouldn't think they'd look in the icebox for money. Well, she also had her purse in a dryer too, thinking that no one would look there for any valuable. And maybe she was right. I don't know. They've never gotten broken into. These are people that at one time would leave their doors unlocked whenever they left, unless they was going on a long trip, which they really didn't ever do that. But they lived in a simpler time, didn't they? Maybe a time when banks weren't all that, well, reliable. Today we expect our money in our banks to be safe. And banks nowadays are insured by either the FDIC or the NCUA. If it's a credit union, it's usually the NCUA. If it's a bank, it's the FDIC. And we expect them to keep our money safe. We entrust them with our money. Well, we need something better, don't we? Because you and I have something more valuable than money. We have something more valuable than gold. We have something more valuable than precious jewels and minerals that needs to be protected. And you say, now, Tim, what's more precious than gold? Have you seen the price of gold? Now, I really haven't looked to see what the price of gold is, but I know during times of trouble, gold goes up, and I imagine it's pretty expensive right now. So what's more expensive than gold? What's more precious than gold? What about you? What about your life? And more specific, what about your soul? Isn't that something that we need to have, something that will guarantee our life and our soul? Not necessarily to give us a long, prosperous life, because that don't always work out, but something that will guarantee our safety, that will guarantee that we're in good hands. Kind of like the insurance commercial. You're in good hands. Well, we need something that's like that out there. And I'm thinking that the world has missed what's there to give them protection, to give them the peace of mind, knowing that they don't have to worry about what's going to happen to their life. And Paul, as I said before, if you're just now joining in, I know a couple of people are. Lee and Sharon's there, and so is Kim, and I'm sure more are going to follow along, and hi to them. But if you will, look at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 12 with me. Paul says, "For this reason I also suffer these things, but I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day." Now we need to think of something here. God is our guarantee. He is the one that Paul says, he's my security. He's the one that's going to be there for me. He's going to protect what I have entrusted to him. So I'm thinking we need to find out what Paul has entrusted to God. If we are to be a Christian and we are to follow in the footsteps of those faithful who has gone on before us, such as Paul, what did Paul entrust to God? And what was Paul convinced that that God is able to guard what Paul has given to him? So let's look at what I think Paul entrusted to God. The first thing is Paul entrusted to God the present. Today. You know, that is really all that you and I are given is now. We may not live to see the sun set. We may not live to see the sun rise. All we have is the here and now. And we know that can be fleeting. at best. So Paul gives God the present. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, 7 through 8, Paul says, "For we have brought nothing into this world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and shelter, or food and covering, with these we shall be content." Paul says all we need to be content with is food and covering. Can you think of anything else that we really need to be content with? Oh, I need a new house, I need a new car, I need a raise in my job. I'd like to have an Armani suit to wear. I'd like to have a lot of things. I'd like to be able to have a nice shiny gold bracelet or chain or whatever you want to call it hanging around me. I like to have a nice house. And to go to that nice house, don't forget central heat and air. I live in Oklahoma, it gets hot. Sometimes, even though it's windy most of the time, whenever it's hot and sticky and your air is out, guess what? So's the wind. And it gets hot. Well, I need all these things to be content with, but Paul says really all we need as a Christian is food and covering. Something that we can have that will satisfy our needs. You know, Paul wrote 1 Timothy from prison. He knew a little bit about what is lacking in our everyday lives, or in his life. There's a lot of times Paul went without covering. There were a lot of times that Paul went without food. And if you think that being in prison would be something that would give you covering or food, maybe the covering part of it, but really the food, no. Because see, their idea of prison is vastly different from what our idea of prison should be. Prison back then, if you was a prisoner back in the days of Paul, the way you got fed was if you was the first in line, you might get food. But don't bet on it. Feeding prisoners was something of a luxury that people did, that maybe the government did, because you see, they didn't really care about prisoners. Prisoner was something that you was guilty. And if you're still alive, I'm going to have to take care of you, so I might not feed you. So in order to be fed, that's why it's very important when Jesus says to visit those in prison, because in those days it was very true that they may not get food. And Paul was thankful to the Philippians who was supplying his needs sometimes in prison. And so Paul would know if we have food, that's half of being content. And if we have covering, that's the other half. Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, 23 through 29, what he endured preaching the gospel. Mind you, traveling in those days was either by horse, mule, or camel, or foot, or ship. And none of those was speedy. Okay? Hotels weren't common in those days. Long stretches between towns might be possible, and so you might have to sleep out in the open. So listen to what Paul says he personally went through preaching the gospel. He endured sleeping out in the open. He endured beatings. He endured shipwrecks. He was in danger of robbers and the elements. He was stoned. People drug him outside the town and threw rocks at him, hoping that he would die. And they left him thinking that he was dead, but God raised him back up. He was hungry and thirsty. That's all the physical things that Paul endured sometimes to preach the gospel. And some of those things he endured despite having these things, the luxuries of life. But the most pressing concern for Paul was all the churches. Paul entrusted the present to God. He also entrusted to God the future. You know, there's always the hope of tomorrow. We do this, don't we? We try to save money for retirement. Well, a lot of us have seen our retirement go by the wayside if you have a 401k. Or every time you turn around, there's always something there to take your savings away from you. But nevertheless, we like to try to think that we're going to be able to retire one day. Our future. Oh, you need so much for this. You need so much for that. You need to save. You need to set back. Well, Paul says that he entrusted the future to God. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8, Paul says, knowing that his life was near the end, he said that in the future there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. You know, he'll tell the Philippians that he hadn't quite laid hold of it yet, but he was pressing towards the goal. Always reaching for that goal of eternal life. Always moving forward. He hadn't quite got there yet, but he was always reaching out to it. And also, Paul entrusted to God his soul. It goes without saying, if you're going to believe in God, you better entrust something that's going to live beyond this body and beyond this world. Because sad to say, if this world is all that there is, I'm not so sure that I want to go anywhere else. If this world is all the hope that we have, there's a lot of us that's in trouble, isn't there? Because we're missing out on all the fun. We're missing out on what may bring us contentment. But we know that this is not all that there is, that there is something more, and we need something that will guarantee safety for our soul. And Paul says God is there for that. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 23, he tells the Thessalonians, now may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete, without blame, at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We need to know that God will keep our soul. We need to be able to have confidence that God will protect us. So now that we know that God is there to protect us, how does he protect us? Well, let's look at a few things of how God can protect us. Since we entrust ourselves to him, there must be a way that he can show us that he is there for us. The first thing is that God is there for our future. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, Jesus says, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You want to know how God protects our future? It's only by us giving him our heart. It is only when we decide that we cannot live without God and live without his protection. Well, God also shows that he is trustworthy to protect what we can give him, the present, by providing for us. Again, in Matthew chapter 6, 25 through 32, Jesus says that God will provide for our needs. I'm not going to read that passage there, but I am going to read what Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 through 9, where Solomon asks God to do something for him. And this is what Solomon asks. He says, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you, and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal, and profane the name of my God." You see, God provides just what we need. And we should be content with that. We should be happy in the fact that God gives us what we need when we need it, not necessarily what we want. Because then we'd be a spoiled brat, wouldn't we? But no, God gives us what we need. And a lot of times, what we want comes along with what we need. But I believe that God limits what we should have by being content with what He provides for us. And really, if you look at it, if we look at what He gives us as what we need, it should make us understand that we don't need to be doing unlawful things to acquire what we think we need. You see, there's a difference. What we need, what God knows we need, and what we think we need. It's two different things. Because our need, what we think we need, a lot of times is what we want. But God provides what we need. Next, God hides us. Now you might think, well, what does hiding have to do with protecting us? Well, think of it as hiding us like you putting your valuables in a safe deposit box at the bank. You're given a key to that safe deposit box. And only you or whoever holds that key and knows a number to that box can get into it. My mom has the safe deposit box at the bank. I cannot get into that because, one, I do not have the key, and two, I am not on the account. I may have something in that safe deposit box. I can't remember if I do or not. But I cannot get into that safe deposit box. I entrust her and I entrust that bank to keep whatever's there safe. And so really when I talk about God hiding us, I'm really thinking about that safe deposit box. God does this in a couple of ways. In James chapter 1 verse 17, James says, every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. You know, as long as we are with God, as long as we are following God and obeying God, we are surrounded by His light. We are safe from darkness. And it's a good reason why Paul says in Colossians chapter 3 through 4 that we have died and our life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you will also be revealed with Him in glory. There's a reason why that God hides us in Christ and in His light. And that reason is what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8. He says it's because the devil is prowling the earth like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. He's looking for us. He's looking for children of Christians, those who are trying to live a life for God. That's who Satan's roaming the earth for, looking to devour. And you know those who he gets? Much like the lion that roams the earth, the physical lion that roams the earth, they get the ones that are weak, sick, old, the young, and those who are on the fringes of the herd. And with us, it's the same way. He gets the Christian that is weak, sick, maybe the one who's young, and definitely the one who is full of pride, who thinks they don't need God in their life, or doesn't need God as much as someone else. Someone who really hasn't entrusted themselves to God. We don't need to be on the fringe. We don't need to be anywhere else but inside Christ, hidden in Him with God's light all around us. Because to do so means that we are on the fringe if we're not there with Him. To be in Him means that we are protected. That God has put our soul, our future, and our present in His safe deposit box. And that safe deposit box of His is Jesus. And that's where He expects to find us when He decides it's time to call us home. What have you entrusted? And what have you entrusted to God? Have you put yourself in His care? Have you decided that you cannot live without God? I hope so. But if not, what are you waiting for? The world is violent enough in itself. It's volatile. It's up and down. It's left. It's right. And it's never correct. You see, you can be so far right that you're wrong. And you can be so far left that you're wrong. You can be so full of pride and think that you don't need God, or maybe you think that you don't need God as much as someone else. And you're looking, or you're waiting for an accident to happen. Where are you at in your life? I hope and pray that you are with God, but if not, I ask that you get there soon. Don't wait another day. Don't wait another hour. Don't wait another minute. I realize that we may be still at home, but if you find yourself needing God, find someone to help you get baptized into His Son's death, burial, and resurrection for remission of sins, to be raised up to walk in newness of life before it's too late. Because you see, the only way we get put into His safe deposit box is if we give our lives to His Son and walk with Him. I pray that you are healthy. I pray that you are doing good. And I pray that you have entrusted your soul to God. Until next week, I'll try to keep every one of you in my prayers. And I look forward to doing this again soon. Thank you.